Welcome to our journey through the legendary armaments of the lands between. The Ruins Greatsword. High above the lands between, in the ancient city of crumbling Farum Azula, where time itself flows strangely and the laws of reality bend and fracture, there once stood structures of impossible age and construction. These ruins predated the age of the Erd Tree, and predated perhaps even the age of the Crucible, representing civilizations whose names have been lost to the endless erosion of time. And then, in a moment of cosmic violence, a meteorite struck, shattering stone that had stood for countless ages, reducing monuments to rubble, destroying what should have been eternal. Most of that rubble crumbled to dust or fell in useless fragments, but some pieces survived the impact intact, their structure somehow resilient enough to withstand forces that pulverized everything around them. These surviving fragments were not merely durable, they had absorbed something from the meteorite's destructive impact, and had become infused with the gravitational power that allowed celestial objects to fall from the heavens and reshape the earth below. And from one such fragment, a weapon was forged. The Ruins Greatsword is originally rubble from a ruin which fell from the sky, honed into a weapon by those who recognized the potential in stone that could survive such catastrophic destruction. The weapon's description tells us plainly that the ruin it came from crumbled when struck by a meteorite, and this weapon harbors that destructive power, carrying within its mass the forces that shattered an ancient city. The sword itself is massive, a true colossal weapon that defies easy categorization. It appears to be fashioned from a pillar or architectural fragment, still bearing the carved details and structural elements of whatever building it once supported. The stone is gray and weathered, marked by the ages it has endured, yet the edge has been sharpened to lethal keenness. Looking at the Ruins Greatsword, one sees both a weapon and a monument, both tool of war and reminder of catastrophe. What makes this weapon remarkable beyond its unusual construction is the gravitational power it still contains. The meteorite that destroyed the original ruin did not simply impact and pass. It left something of itself behind, some residual force that continues to manifest through the fragments that survived. When the Ruins Greatsword's unique skill is activated, that power erupts forth in ways that defy normal understanding of how weapons should function. The skill is called Wave of Destruction, and it perfectly captures what this weapon represents. The wielder raises the massive blade high overhead, channeling the gravitational forces contained within the stone. Then, with tremendous force, they slam the sword into the ground, and from the point of impact erupts a wave of pure gravitational energy. This wave travels outward along the earth, a rippling distortion of space itself that tears through everything in its path. The wave appears as purple energy, the same color associated with gravitational sorceries throughout the lands between. But this is not carefully controlled magic shaped by study and understanding. This is raw destructive force, the power of cosmic impact made manifest through a weapon. The wave does not discriminate or carefully target. It simply destroys, reducing enemies to rubble, much as the original meteorite reduced the ruin to fragments. What makes Wave of Destruction particularly devastating is how it scales. The damage increases significantly with the weapon's upgrade level, making a fully upgraded Ruin's Greatsword capable of unleashing waves that can obliterate groups of enemies or deal massive damage to single large targets. The skill has good range, traveling a considerable distance before dissipating, and the wide area of effect means it catches enemies trying to flank or surround the wielder. The weapon requires significant investment in both strength and intelligence to wield effectively, an unusual combination that speaks to its dual nature. The strength requirement represents the raw physical power needed to lift and swing a weapon this massive, to control its weight and leverage its heft. The intelligence requirement represents understanding of the gravitational forces contained within, the mental capacity to channel and direct powers that normally belong to the stars and the spaces between them. This stat distribution makes the Ruin's Greatsword particularly well suited for a battle mage build, warriors who combine physical might with arcane understanding. The location where this weapon can be obtained tells its own story. The Ruin's Greatsword drops from defeating a specific boss encounter in Redmane Castle, that fortress in southeastern Caelid, where the Festival of Radon takes place. But the weapon is not available during the festival itself. It can only be claimed by defeating the Misbegotten Warrior and Crucible Knight duo, who appear in the castle plaza when the festival is not active. This timing creates an interesting wrinkle in acquisition. Players who rush to the festival, eager to face Radon and claim his legendary weapons, will find the castle transformed for that event, and the duo boss will not be present. Only after Radon falls and the festival concludes, when speaking with witch hunter Jaren and allowing time to pass, will the castle return to its normal state and the duo appear, guarding the Ruin's Greatsword for those persistent enough to seek it out. The boss fight itself presents a significant challenge. The Misbegotten Warrior is fast and aggressive, wielding grafted blade weaponry with acrobatic ferocity. The Crucible Knight is slower, but incredibly dangerous, with powerful sword strikes, tail sweeps, and the ability to sprout wings and perform aerial attacks. Fighting both simultaneously requires careful target prioritization and positioning, creating openings against one while avoiding the other. The reward for overcoming this challenge is immediate access to a legendary weapon that can carry a player through the entire game. The Ruin's Greatsword hits hard even at base upgrade level, and as it is enhanced with somber smithing stones, it becomes truly devastating. The combination of high physical damage, decent magic damage scaling, and the incredible utility of Wave of Destruction makes it effective in almost any situation. Against groups of enemies, Wave of Destruction clears entire rooms with single activation. Against large bosses, it deals substantial damage while also providing some control over the battlefield. Against enemies weak to magic damage, the sword's inherent magical component enhances its effectiveness. The versatility is impressive for a weapon that might initially seem to be a simple bonk stick. The visual design of the Ruin's Greatsword reinforces its origins with every detail. The carved reliefs still visible on the stone suggest it came from a structure of importance, perhaps a temple or a palace. The way the blade has been fashioned from the original fragment shows deliberate craftsmanship, someone taking the time to recognize the potential in rubble and transform it into something deadly. The purple gravitational energy that manifests during Wave of Destruction creates a stark contrast with the gray ancient stone, cosmic power channeled through earthly material. There's something profoundly symbolic about a weapon fashioned from ruins. The lands between is itself a place of ruins, a shattered world where the golden age has crumbled, and what remains are fragments of former glory. The Erd tree still stands, but is falling. The great cities endure, but decay. The demigods persist, but are diminished. Everything is rubble, waiting to acknowledge itself as such. Ruins that pretend to still be whole. The Ruin's Greatsword embraces this truth. It does not pretend to be anything other than what it is, a fragment of something destroyed, repurposed into a weapon by those who understood that even destruction can be harnessed and directed. The meteorite did not simply end the ancient ruin, it transformed it, left it changed but not powerless, broken but not without purpose. When a tarnished wields the Ruin's Greatsword, they carry this philosophy into battle. They accept that the world has been shattered, that the old orders have crumbled, that what remains are fragments. But those fragments still have power. They can still be shaped. They can still be used to destroy or to build, to tear down what little remains standing, or to clear ground for something new to grow. The gravitational power contained within the blade is itself a kind of destruction. Gravity pulls things down, drags the mighty low, ensures that everything that rises must eventually fall. It is the force that brought the meteorite crashing into Farum Azula in the first place. The power that ensures no structure stands forever. No civilization endures eternally. Gravity is patient catastrophe, inevitable ruin, delivered in slow motion until suddenly it accelerates and everything collapses at once. But gravity is also the force that holds worlds together, that creates the conditions for life to exist, that bind the very fabric of reality. It destroys, yes, but it also shapes and sustains. The Ruin's Greatsword channels both aspects, wielding destruction that can be directed, catastrophe that can be controlled and aimed at chosen targets, rather than allowed to fall randomly. In practical terms, the Ruin's Greatsword has become something of a fan-favorite weapon, despite, or perhaps because of, its unusual origins and requirements. The visual appeal of swinging around a massive stone pillar cannot be understated. There is something primal and satisfying about the weapon's appearance and feel. A sense that this is the kind of weapon that barbarians in ancient times might have wielded before the age of refined metallurgy and elegant blade work. When fully charged, the heavy attack of the Ruin's Greatsword strikes with the weapon itself and then triggers a secondary burst of stone fragments and gravitational force that extends the range and damage of the blow. This creates a unique rhythm to combat, encouraging players to find moments where they can safely charge attacks and unleash the full devastating potential of each strike. Against enemies with high poise and stability, the Ruin's Greatsword becomes particularly effective. The sheer impact force of each strike staggers most foes, creating openings for follow-up attacks or allowing the wielder to control the pace of combat. Combined with Wave of Destruction for area control and crowd management, the weapon provides a complete toolkit for dominating battlefields through pure, overwhelming force. The Ruin's Greatsword asks a fundamental question through its very existence. What do we do with the fragments of a destroyed past? Do we mourn what was lost and treat the ruins as sacred, untouchable reminders of better days? Or do we recognize that even ruins have value, that fragments can be repurposed, that destruction does not have to be the end of usefulness? The weapon chooses the second path. It takes rubble and makes it deadly. It transforms architectural failure into martial success. It proves that something does not have to be whole to be powerful, does not have to be intact to serve a purpose, and does not have to be as originally intended to still matter. For a tarnished wandering the lands between, seeking to become Elden Lord or to achieve some other ending, this philosophy resonates deeply. They are themselves a kind of ruin, tarnished, who were cast out, who lost the grace of gold, who were considered failed and useless. Yet here they are, repurposed into champions, their exile transformed into purpose, their status as discarded fragments, leveraged into potential for greatness. The Ruin's Greatsword does not ask to be beautiful or elegant. It makes no claims to represent some grand tradition or noble lineage. It is rubble that survived catastrophe and was made into something strong. That is enough. That is everything. In the hands of someone who understands its nature and accepts its truth, it becomes devastatingly effective, despite or because of its origins in ruin and destruction. The purple waves of gravitational force continue to ripple outward from countless impacts. Each activation of Wave of Destruction, a reminder that even forces capable of shattering ancient cities can be harnessed, controlled, and directed towards chosen ends. The ancient ruin that fell from the sky is gone, reduced to fragments scattered across the earth. But this fragment remembers, carries that moment of cosmic violence within itself, and waits patiently for those who will wield it to channel that destruction against the next target that needs to be reduced to ruins. Eleonora's Poleblade. In the land of reeds, that distant country across the sea, where the art of the blade has been refined through generations into something approaching perfection. Weapons are not merely tools, but expressions of philosophy. The katana, the nagamaki, the naginata, each represents a different approach to combat, a different understanding of how violence can be executed with grace and precision. And among these traditional implements, there exists a unique variant, the twinned naginata, paired blades that can be wielded together to create patterns of attack that overwhelm opponents through sheer, relentless momentum. One such weapon made its way to the lands between, carried by a warrior named Eleonora. She was not merely skilled with her chosen armament. The descriptions tell us that her mastery of the sword was such that her onslaught was likened to a whirlwind, that her technique had transcended mere competence and became something that observers struggled to process or describe. She moved like the wind, like a storm given human form, her twin blades creating cyclones of steel that left devastation in their wake. But Eleonora's legacy would not remain pure. The description of her weapon tells us plainly that her legacy is now stained by accursed blood. This is not metaphorical language or poetic exaggeration. Eleonora became a bloody finger, one of those who serve Mohg, Lord of Blood, who have embraced the communion with the formless mother and accepted the power that comes from accursed blood. What might have been a legendary career defined by martial excellence became instead a cautionary tale about what happens when technique is placed in service of dark purpose. The weapon itself is immediately distinctive. Eleonora's Poleblade is twinned, two naginata-style blades that function as a single weapon, wielded together through the twin blade moveset. The blades themselves are elegant, curved in the traditional style of Land of Reed's weaponry, but they are stained with a reddish tint that suggests the blood that has soaked them is not entirely mundane. When wielded, the weapon deals both physical and fire damage, with the fire manifesting as the blood flame associated with Mohg's dynasty. The weapon scales primarily with dexterity and arcane, an unusual combination that marks it as distinctly different from traditional Land of Reed's weaponry. Most weapons from that distant country rely purely on dexterity, favoring speed and precision over any kind of arcane power. But Eleonora's Poleblade requires investment in arcane, speaking to how her technique has been corrupted or enhanced, depending on one's perspective, by the blood magic she embraced when joining Mohg's followers. This arcane scaling is not merely a stat requirement. The weapon inflicts blood loss buildup with every strike, making it devastating against enemies with large health pools. As the arcane stat increases, the rate of blood loss buildup accelerates, creating a feedback loop where investing in arcane simultaneously increases the weapon's direct damage and makes its status effect proc more frequently. Against most enemies, a brief flurry of attacks with Eleonora's Poleblade is enough to trigger hemorrhage multiple times, dealing massive percentage-based damage that ignores defense and resistances. The unique weapon skill of Eleonora's Poleblade is called Bloodblade Dance, and it perfectly captures what made her famous. When activated, the wielder leaps toward their target and begins executing a tornado-like series of rapid strikes, spinning and slashing with both blades in a pattern that hints multiple times in quick succession. The visual effect is spectacular, creating the impression of a crimson whirlwind as the blood-stained blades trace overlapping arcs through the air. But Bloodblade Dance is not simply a single attack. An additional input allows for a follow-up that continues the assault before the wielder performs an evasive maneuver, creating distance from the target. This design makes the skill both offensive and defensive, allowing for aggressive pressure followed by tactical retreat. In the hands of a skilled player, this creates rhythm of engagement and disengagement, rushing in with Bloodblade Dance to deal damage and build blood loss, then backing away to avoid retaliation, then rushing in again once the enemy's attack windows close. The blood loss buildup from Bloodblade Dance is particularly impressive. Each hit of the multi-strike combo contributes to hemorrhage, and because the skill connects so many times so quickly, it can trigger blood loss multiple times during a single activation against tough enemies or bosses. This makes Eleonora's Poleblade extremely effective at melting health bars, turning apparently difficult encounters into manageable fights through sheer status effect application. The heavy attack of the weapon deserves special attention. Unlike standard twin blades, which have relatively conventional heavy attack animations, Eleonora's Poleblade has a unique diagonal spinning slash that hits multiple times in rapid succession. The charged version of this attack extends the spinning, creating even more hits. This unique moveset element gives the weapon additional identity and provides another tool for building blood loss while dealing respectable direct damage. To obtain Eleonora's Poleblade, a Tarnished must encounter and defeat Eleonora herself. She appears as an NPC invader at the Second Church of Marika in the Altus Plateau, one of those churches scattered throughout the lands between, where Marika the Eternal left statues of herself for contemplation. The juxtaposition is notable. Eleonora, servant of Mohg, who has rejected the Golden Order, invades at a site dedicated to Queen Marika, the God Queen who established that order. The invasion is tied to the quest line of Bloody Finger Hunter Yura, though interestingly, Eleonora will appear even if the player has not engaged with Yura's quest. This suggests her presence at the Second Church of America is not coincidental, but intentional, that she has reasons to be there beyond simply hunting Tarnished. Perhaps she seeks to desecrate the church, to make a statement against the Golden Order. Perhaps she guards something Mohg once protected. Perhaps she simply finds satisfaction in killing the faithful where they come to worship. When Eleonora invades, she demonstrates why her technique was likened to a whirlwind. She uses her Poleblade aggressively, chaining attacks into Bloodblade dance, building blood loss rapidly while maintaining pressure. She can be a surprisingly difficult opponent for unprepared players, especially those not familiar with the Twin Blade moveset or not expecting an invasion at that location. Her relentless offense creates little room for healing or recovering stamina, forcing reactive play and careful timing. Defeating her rewards not just the weapon, but understanding of how it can be used. Players who struggled against Eleonora's aggressive style can then adopt that same approach, wielding her Poleblade to overwhelm enemies with the same whirlwind technique that made her famous. The weapon becomes both trophy and teaching tool, carrying forward her legacy even as it passes to someone who ended that legacy through combat. The connection to Mohg's dynasty cannot be ignored. Eleonora is explicitly identified as a Bloody Finger, one of the violet variety, which suggests some ranking or specialization within Mohg's forces. She has accepted the blood of communion, allowed the Formless Mother to bestow power upon her accursed blood, and integrated that dark blessing into her fighting style. The blood flame that coats her blades during certain attacks is not her natural power, but a gift from the outer god that Mohg serves. This raises interesting questions about her journey. Was she always a warrior of the land of reeds who came to the lands between, seeking something, only to find Mohg's offer compelling? Did she achieve her legendary mastery before or after accepting blood communion? Did the blood magic enhance her already formidable skills, or did it corrupt and diminish them while providing different kinds of power? The weapon's description suggests the latter, telling us her legacy is stained, implying that what she could have been was somehow tarnished by what she chose to become. Yet, the weapon itself remains extraordinarily effective. Whatever philosophical or moral judgments might be made about Eleonora's choices, the practical reality is that her Poleblade is one of the most devastating weapons available for arcane builds. The combination of rapid attacks, blood loss buildup, and the spectacular effectiveness of Bloodblade Dance makes it a top-tier weapon choice for players who want to build around the hemorrhage mechanic. The weapon synergizes particularly well with other items and equipment that enhance blood loss or provide bonuses. The white mask helmet which increases attack power when blood loss occurs nearby, turns every hemorrhage trigger into a damage buff. The Lord of Blood's Exaltation Talisman provides similar benefits. Building around these synergies can take Eleonora's Poleblade from good to very good. In PvP contexts, Eleonora's Poleblade has earned both respect and notoriety. The Bloodblade dance skill, when well timed, can catch opponents and execute its full combo before they can escape, leading to rapid hemorrhage procs that can turn fights instantly. The evasive maneuver at the end creates distance, making it harder to punish. However, skilled players learn to recognize the startup animation and can dodge or interrupt the skill, creating interesting mind games around when and how to activate it. For PvE content, particularly against bosses, Eleonora's Poleblade shines in situations where aggressive, sustained offense is viable. Bosses with large health pools who would normally require extended fights can be brought down much more quickly when hemorrhage procs repeatedly. The weapon's rapid attack speed and multi-hit weapon skill allow for maximum blood loss buildup in the minimum time, effectively shortening encounters that might otherwise feel like wars of attrition. There's something tragic about Eleonora's story, or at least about what we can piece together from the limited information available. She came from the land of reeds, a place where martial traditions are honored and preserved, where mastery of the blade is considered a path toward enlightenment. She achieved such skill that observers compared her technique to forces of nature, to the whirlwind that cannot be grasped or stopped. She could have been remembered purely for that achievement, her name spoken alongside legendary warriors whose dedication to their craft elevated them above the merely skilled. But somewhere along her journey through the lands between, she encountered Mohg, or his followers. She was offered power, communion with an outer god, strength that came from embracing accursed blood, rather than relying solely on technique. And she accepted. Perhaps she felt her skills had plateaued and she needed more power to achieve her goals. Perhaps she was injured or facing defeat and grasped at the only lifeline available. Perhaps she was simply curious about what her blood communion could add to her already formidable attacks. Whatever her reasons, the choice changed her legacy. Now, when her name is spoken, it comes with qualifiers. Her mastery was extraordinary, but her legacy is stained. Her technique was like a whirlwind, but she placed it in service of darkness. She could have been a legend, defined purely by excellence, but she became instead a cautionary tale about how even the most skilled can fall off when they seek power from questionable sources. Yet, Eleonora's Poleblade endures, and through it, her technique is preserved. The weapon can be wielded by any tarnished with sufficient stats, carrying forward her whirlwind style into whatever context they choose. perhaps in the hands of someone who uses it for purposes she never intended. Her technique achieves a form of redemption, her mastery preserved while being separated from the choices that stained her name. The twin blades spin, bloodstained and elegant, instruments of the whirlwind technique that made Eleonora famous for the blood communion that corrupted her legacy. They do not judge, they simply cut, rapid and relentless, building toward hemorrhage with every strike, channeling both the traditional mastery of the Land of Reeds and the dark gifts of Mohg's dynasty. In the right hands, they become exactly what Eleonora demonstrated in her prime, a storm of blades that overwhelms opposition through sheer, relentless pressure, a whirlwind that cannot be stopped, only endured and survived if one is strong and skilled enough. Mohgwyn's Sacred Spear. Deep beneath the surface of the world, accessible through hidden portals or through bloody communion, there exists a palace built to house a vision of the future. Mohgwyn Palace stands as a monument to ambition and curse, to the dream of establishing a new dynasty, built not on the golden light of the Erd Tree, but on the power of accursed blood. And the lord of this palace, Mohg, Lord of Blood, wields a weapon that serves multiple purposes simultaneously: an armament, a symbol, and an instrument of divine communion. The description of Mohgwyn's sacred spear tells us it is the trident of Mohg, Lord of Blood, a sacred spear that will come to symbolize his dynasty. This future tense is crucial. The Mohgwyn dynasty that Mohg envisions has not yet come to pass. His palace exists, his followers serve him, his blood rituals continue. But the true dynasty, the age of blood that he seeks to usher in, remains unrealized. The spear is sacred not because of what it has accomplished, but because of what it represents: the possibility of a future where accursed blood is not curse, but crown, not shame, but source of power. But the spear is more than symbolic. The description continues, telling us that as well as serving as a weapon, it is an instrument of communion with an outer god who bestows power upon accursed blood. This is crucial to understanding what the spear actually does and why it matters. Mohg is not simply a demigod wielding a particularly effective weapon. He is a conduit for an outer god, specifically the Formless Mother, also known as the Mother of Truth. And the spear is the physical implement through which that communion occurs. The description ends with a cryptic statement: the Mother of Truth desires a wound. This single line contains profound theological and practical implications. The Formless Mother, the outer god that Mohg serves, wants to be wounded. This is not masochism or self-destruction, but something more fundamental to her name. She exists in some formless state and seeks wounding, seeks to be given form through violence, seeks to manifest through blood and pain. Every wound inflicted, every victim bled, every hemorrhage triggered becomes an offering to her, a way of giving her presence in the physical world. When Mohg wields his sacred spear, he is performing a ritual as much as fighting. Each thrust of the weapon is simultaneously attack and prayer, damage and devotion. He is wounding his enemies, yes, but he is also symbolically wounding the formless mother herself, giving her the sensation and reality she desires, strengthening the connection between his world and hers. The spear is literally an instrument of communion, a tool that allows interaction between the physical and the metaphysical, between demigod and outer god. The weapon itself is a trident, a three-pronged spear design that appears across various mythologies and contexts. In Mohg's case, the trident is crafted from materials that appear organic and disturbing, with what looks like twisted flesh or perhaps condensed blood forming parts of the weapon's structure. The description and close examination suggest the spear may be covered in small humanoid forms, bodies absorbed into the weapon's essence, victims of Mohg's blood rituals who have literally become part of the armament. If this interpretation is correct, it makes Mohgwyn's sacred spear one of the most horrific weapons in the lands between, not for what it does in combat, but for what it represents about Mohg's methods and philosophy. Each body absorbed into the spear is a life consumed by the dynasty, a person transformed from individual into component, from subject into object. They become part of the weapon that will symbolize the new age, their identities erased, but their physical forms preserved as building blocks of Mohg's ambition. The weapon scales primarily with strength, dexterity, and arcane, with arcane having the strongest scaling. This distribution makes perfect sense given the spear's nature and purpose. The strength and dexterity requirements represent the physical capability needed to wield a weapon of this size and weight effectively. The arcane scaling represents the blood magic infused in every aspect of the spear's existence, the power granted by the formless mother that flows through the weapon with every strike. Like other blood-aligned weapons, Mohgwyn's sacred spear causes blood loss buildup with each hit, but the real power of the weapon lies in its unique skill, an ability that perfectly captures everything Mohg represents and everything the spear is meant to accomplish. The skill is called Blood Boon Ritual, and it is simultaneously a devastating attack and a literal religious ceremony performed in the heat of combat. When Blood Boon Ritual is activated, the wielder raises the sacred spear high and thrusts it forward as if stabbing upward into empty air. But the target is not empty space or physical enemies. The weapon is piercing the body of the formless mother herself, giving her the wound she desires. The spear can be thrust up to 3 times, with each thrust creating an explosion of blood that damages everything nearby. These explosions deal significant damage and build blood loss rapidly, on all affected targets. But the ritual accomplishes more than just damage. For a duration after completing the thrusts, the spear becomes coated in blood flame, a dark red fire that burns with the power of accursed blood. While this blood flame coating is active, all attacks with the spear deal additional fire damage and build blood loss even faster than normal. This transforms the weapon temporarily into an even more devastating implement, the physical manifestation of the Formless Mother's blessing following successful communion. The visual effect of Blood Boon Ritual is spectacular and disturbing in equal measure. Each thrust erupts in a spray of blood that seems to come from nowhere, as if the spear is indeed piercing some invisible entity and releasing their vital fluid. The explosions spread outward in waves, coating everything nearby in crimson. Then the weapon itself ignites with blood flame, burning with fire that should not exist. Thermal energy, generated not from combustion, but from the metaphysical properties of accursed blood, given form. Using this skill effectively requires understanding its strengths and limitations. The thrusts have relatively short range, requiring the wielder to be close to enemies to ensure that the blood explosions connect. However, the explosions have a decent area of effect, making the skill excellent for hitting groups of enemies or for catching fast-moving targets who might dodge the initial thrust. The blood flame buff that follows provides sustained value, improving every subsequent attack until the duration expires. Against bosses and tough enemies, Blood Boon Ritual excels at rapidly building blood loss. The 3 thrusts can often trigger 1 or even 2 hemorrhage procs by themselves, dealing massive percentage-based damage before the actual boss fight mechanics even need to be engaged with. Following up with the blood flame coated regular attacks continues the pressure, making it possible to keep enemies in a near constant state of hemorrhage vulnerability. To obtain Mohgwyn's sacred spear, a tarnished must first reach Mohgwyn Palace, either through Vare's quest line or through a teleporter in the consecrated snowfield. Then they must face Mohg, Lord of Blood himself, one of the most challenging bosses in the game. Mohg's fight is notorious for its difficulty, combining aggressive blood magic attacks with powerful physical strikes and the infamous 3-part chant of Nile that drains massive amounts of health unless countered with specific items. Defeating Mohg rewards his remembrance, which can be exchanged with Enia at the Round Table Hold for either Mohgwyn's sacred spear or the Blood Boon incantation. For those who choose the spear, they inherit not just a weapon, but an instrument of communion with an outer god, a tool designed to wound the Formless Mother and channel her blessings into the physical world. The weapon's effectiveness in both PvE and PvP contexts has made it a favorite among players who build around arcane and blood loss. In PvE, Blood Boon Ritual can trivialize difficult encounters by rapidly stacking hemorrhage procs. In PvP, the wide area of the blood explosions and the lingering blood flame buff make it a threatening weapon, that forces opponents to respect its space control capabilities. But beyond the practical combat applications, Mohgwyn's sacred spear represents something philosophically significant. It is a weapon designed for communion, for bridging the gap between mortal and divine, between the physical and the formless. Every thrust is prayer, every explosion of blood is offering. Every moment the blood flame coating remains active is continued communion with an entity that exists beyond normal understanding. The formless mother desires wounds because she has no form to wound naturally. She is, as her title suggests, formless, existing in some state that transcends physical boundaries. But through Mohg and through the spear he wields, she can experience wounding vicariously, can feel the violence she cannot inflict upon herself, and can manifest through the blood that spills in her name. This is not worship in any conventional sense, but something stranger and darker, a relationship where God and a worshipper both derive sustenance from the act of violence performed in communion. For Mohg, the spear represents everything he has worked toward. The dynasty he seeks to establish will be built on accursed blood, on taking what the Golden Order considered curse and shame, and transforming it into source of power and pride. Those born with the omen curse, marked by twisted horns and considered abominations, will be the foundation of his new age. The formless mother who grants power to accursed blood will be the god of this dynasty, replacing the greater will and its golden order with something built on blood and wound and communion. The sacred spear is the symbol of this vision, the implement through which it will be achieved. Every enemy it strikes, every wound it inflicts, every drop of blood it spills is a step toward the Mohgwyn dynasty becoming real. The weapon does not ask for faith in abstract principles or devotion to distant ideals. It asks only for violence, for the willingness to wound and to be wounded, for the acceptance that blood can be sacred when shed in service of the right vision. When Untarnished wields Mohgwyn's sacred spear, they carry forward this bloody ambition, whether they intend to or not. The weapon channels the formless mother's power, regardless of the wielder's goals. Each activation of blood boon ritual wounds her, communes with her, strengthens the connection between the physical world and whatever realm she inhabits. The blood explosions that result are her response, her blessing made manifest, her approval of the violence offered in her name. The disturbing appearance of the weapon, with its possible incorporation of human forms into its structure, reinforces this dark communion. If indeed the spear contains the bodies of those who have been absorbed into Mohg's rituals, then wielding it means carrying those victims with you, making them part of your violence, using their sacrifice as foundation for your power. They have become literally objectified, transformed from people into components of a weapon designed to wound a god. There is something deeply unsettling about this entire concept, yet also something compelling. The weapon offers real power to those willing to embrace its nature, It makes no false promises or empty claims. It delivers exactly what it advertises: the ability to commune with an outer god and channel her power through violence, blood, and wounding. For those seeking alternatives to the Golden Order, for those born with curses they want transformed into blessings, Mohgwyn's sacred spear represents a path that might actually deliver on its promise. The spear asks a fundamental question: is communion worth the cost? Is the power gained from wounding the formless mother, from spilling blood in her name, from literally carrying the bodies of past victims as part of your weapon, worth what must be sacrificed in terms of conventional morality and ethics? Mohg answered yes. His followers answer yes. Whether a tarnished answers yes is up to each player to decide. The three-pronged design of the trident creates a distinctive silhouette, immediately recognizable even at a distance. When coated with blood flame from the blood boon ritual, the weapon becomes even more visually striking. Dark red flames dancing along its length, fire that burns with metaphysical rather than merely physical heat. The spear becomes a beacon of Mohg's vision, a declaration that accursed blood has power, that the dynasty will rise, and that the formless mother receives her desired wounds and grants her blessings in return. Mohgwyn's sacred spear stands as a testament to what happens when someone wholly commits to a dark vision. When a demigod decides that the existing order must be replaced, not with something similar, but with something fundamentally different. It is not a weapon of reform, but of revolution. Not a tool to fix the Golden Order, but an implement to establish something that rejects everything the Golden Order stood for. And it endures, waiting in remembrance form for tarnished who will wield it, continuing to wound the formless mother, to draw her blessings long after Mohg himself has fallen. The Winged Scythe and the Halo Scythe. Among the weapon types that appear in the lands between, few carry as much symbolic and theological weight as the scythe. Associated across cultures and ages with death, with harvest, with the reaping of souls and the cutting of life's thread, the scythe transforms agricultural implement into a reminder of mortality. In the hands of certain warriors and believers, the scythe becomes more than a symbol. It becomes sacred armament, tool of divine purpose, weapon blessed by understanding of death's role in the natural order. Tooth scythes in particular stand out among the many blades and implements scattered throughout the realm. The Winged Scythe and the Halo Scythe, while distinct in their origins and immediate purposes, share connections to beliefs that exist outside the Golden Order's orthodox teachings, to warriors who serve powers and principles that the Erdtree did not sanction. The Winged Scythe can be found in the Tombsward ruins in the Weeping Peninsula, resting in a chest behind an imp statue seal. Its description tells us that it is a sacred scythe resembling the closed wing of a bird, wielded by the white-winged maidens, some of whom were once daughters of the Erd Tree. This immediate identification with white-winged maidens is significant, connecting the weapon to a specific group of believers and warriors. The description continues with a statement that carries profound implications. It is said that these maidens were appointed as envoys to the divine, and are therefore detested by those who harbor doubt. This tells us several things simultaneously. First, that the maidens who wielded these scythes considered themselves, or were considered by others, to be envoys of the divine, messengers and servants of godly powers. Second, that this claim to divine connection made them targets of hatred from doubters, from those who questioned their authority or rejected their message. The weapon deals both physical and holy damage, reinforcing its sacred nature. More importantly, it has a unique weapon skill called Angel's Wings. When activated, the wielder sweeps the scythe in an upward arc, releasing a projectile blade of light that travels forward and upward. This projectile not only deals holy damage, but crucially prevents enemies it strikes from being able to use Flask of Crimson Tears to heal for a duration. This healing prevention effect is remarkably powerful, especially in PvP context. An invader or duelist struck by Angel's Wings suddenly finds themselves unable to recover health, creating a significant tactical advantage for the scythe wielder. In PvE, the effect is less universally useful, since most enemies don't use healing flasks, but against specific boss fights or enemies that do have healing mechanics, it provides valuable utility. The winged scythe scales with strength, dexterity, and faith, with faith having the strongest scaling. This makes it an excellent weapon for faith-based builds, particularly those that want a faster weapon than the typical heavy hammers and greatswords often associated with faith stat investment. The scythe's moveset provides good reach and wide sweeping attacks, making it effective for crowd control while still being fast enough for one-on-one encounters. The connection to white-winged maidens and their status as daughters of the Erd Tree, who became divine envoys, suggests a complex relationship with the Golden Order. These were not rebels or heretics in the conventional sense, but believers who perhaps took their faith in directions the Orthodox Church did not approve of. They claimed direct connection to divine powers, positioning themselves as envoys, and this claim made them controversial enough to be detested by doubters. The fact that the scythe resembles a closed bird wing adds layers of symbolism. Wings represent ascension, transcendence, the ability to move between earth and sky, between mortal and divine realms. A closed wing suggests potential not yet realized, power held in reserve, readiness to unfold and reveal full capacity. When the angel's wings skill is activated, perhaps that symbolism becomes literal as the weapon's power unfolds and releases its divine projectile. The Halo Scythe shares the scythe weapon type, but comes from a distinctly different context. This weapon is wielded by clean-wrought knights, those elite warriors who served Melania and who willingly contracted scarlet rot in order to fight alongside the commander despite her affliction. The Halo Scythe can be obtained as a drop from clean-wrought knights who wield it, making acquisition somewhat random but eventually accessible through persistent farming. The description of the Halo Scythe tells us that pagan beliefs endure and the worship of the ancient dawn persists. This single sentence opens entire avenues of interpretation. What are these pagan beliefs? Who worships the ancient dawn? How does this relate to the clean-wrought knights and their service to Melania? The ancient dawn worship suggests beliefs that predate the Golden Order, spiritual traditions that existed before the age of the Erd Tree, and which have persisted despite centuries of orthodox religious dominance. The term pagan in this context likely means any belief system outside the Erd Tree's theological framework, practices and faiths that the Golden Order might consider primitive or heretical, but which their practitioners see as legitimate and ancient. That clean-wrought knights wield a weapon associated with these pagan beliefs suggest that Melania's forces either incorporated warriors from diverse backgrounds, or that Melania herself was more tolerant of heterodox beliefs than other demigods might have been. The clean-wrought knights are explicitly loyal to Melania, willing to contract scarlet rot to continue serving her, even knowing the agony and decay it brings. For such devoted warriors to carry weapons tied to pagan dawn worship suggests those beliefs were not incompatible with service to the Blade of Miquella. The Halo Scythe deals physical and holy damage like the winged scythe, but its unique weapon skill is different. Called Miquella's Ring of Light, the skill creates a halo of light around the wielder that then expands outward, damaging enemies it touches. This is an area of effect ability that provides excellent crowd control and situational awareness, hitting enemies in all directions rather than requiring precise aiming. The naming of the skill after Miquella rather than Melania is interesting. It reinforces the close connection between the twins, suggesting that Miquella's influence extended to Melania's warriors, that his sacred light blessed their weapons even as scarlet rot consumed their flesh. Miquella, who crafted unalloyed gold specifically to help resist his sister's affliction, who planted the Halig tree as a haven for the unwanted, appears here in the arsenal of Melania's most devoted followers. The Halo Scythe scales with strength, dexterity, and faith, similar to the winged scythe, but with somewhat different weight in the scaling ratios. It is slightly heavier and requires more strength to wield effectively, reflecting perhaps the more martial nature of the clean-wrought knights compared to the white-winged maidens. When considering these two scythes together, patterns emerge. Both are faith-scaled weapons wielded by warriors with complex relationships to established religious authority. Both deal holy damage while being associated with beliefs outside Orthodox Golden Order theology. Both have weapon skills that create light-based projections or effects, connecting them to themes of illumination, revelation, and divine manifestation. The scythe as weapon type carries its own significance beyond these specific examples. In agricultural contexts, the scythe is a tool of harvest, used to reap grain when it has reached maturity. In religious and philosophical contexts, the scythe becomes symbol of death, the harvester, the inevitable reaping of souls when lives reach their appointed ends. To wield the scythe in combat is to position oneself as harvester, as one who determines when the reaping occurs, who decides what is ready to be cut down. For the white-winged maidens, this reaping was explicitly connected to their role as divine envoys. They were messengers of death, perhaps, or shepherds of souls, guiding those who passed from the physical world to whatever came next. Their detesting by doubters might stem from this claim to authority over death's timing and meaning, this assertion that they knew divine will regarding who should be reaped and when. For the clean-wrought knights, the scythe served a different but related purpose. They fought for Melania, the blade of Miquella, the goddess of wrought who had never known defeat. Their weapons needed to cut through both flesh and spiritual defenses to reap enemies on the battlefield with the same efficiency that agricultural scythes reap grain. That their scythes carried pagan beliefs and worshipped ancient dawn suggested they saw their reaping as returning enemies to some primordial state, to the dawn from which all life emerged and to which all life must eventually return. The healing prevention effect of the winged scythe's angel's wings adds another dimension to the reaping metaphor. When struck by this divine projectile, enemies cannot reverse the harvest, cannot restore what has been cut. The reaping becomes final, irreversible, exactly as it should be when performed by a proper harvester with a proper, blessed implement. In practical gameplay terms, both scythes serve as excellent weapons for faith builds that want something faster and more versatile than ultra-heavy strength faith weapons. The scythe moveset provides good range, sweeping attacks for crowd control, and reasonable attack speed. The faith scaling ensures damage grows as devotion investment increases. The unique weapon skills provide utility beyond simple damage, offering healing prevention and area control that can turn difficult fights into manageable encounters. The winged scythe in particular has become quite popular in PvP due to the healing prevention effect. In a meta where builds often rely on surviving initial damage bursts and then healing to continue the fight, denying the ability to heal creates enormous pressure. A player struck by angel's wings must either retreat to safety until the effect wears off, or commit to fighting without their emergency health restoration option. The Halo Scythe shines more in PvE contexts, where groups of enemies regularly surround players, and area of effect attacks become crucial. Miquella's Ring of Light can clear enemies in all directions, providing breathing room and dealing holy damage that many enemies are vulnerable to. The fact that the skill can be cast without needing to precisely aim makes it useful in chaotic situations where multiple threats demand attention simultaneously. Both weapons ask players to embrace the symbolism they carry. To wield the winged scythe is to become like the white-winged maidens, an envoy of the divine, someone who reaps according to higher purpose. To wield the halo scythe is to accept pagan wisdom, to worship the ancient dawn, to see combat as sacred harvest performed under Miquella's blessing, despite being outside orthodox Golden Order theology. The weapons remind us that in the lands between, faith takes many forms. Divine authority can be claimed through multiple channels, and holiness is not monopolized by any single religious tradition. The Erd Tree may have been dominant. The Golden Order may have been orthodox. But beneath and alongside that dominance, other beliefs persisted. White-winged maidens served as envoys despite being detested by doubters. Pagan dawn worship continued among elite warriors, sworn to a demigod's service. And scythes, those ancient harvesting tools transformed into weapons of divine purpose, continued to reap according to visions of proper order that the Erd Tree never fully controlled. These scythes endure, waiting to be claimed by tarnished who would carry forward their traditions. The winged scythe rests in its tombsward chest, resembling a closed wing ready to unfold into angel's wings. The halo scythe can be claimed from Cleanrot Knights, carrying with it the pagan beliefs and ancient dawn worship that persisted through rot and devotion. Both offer power to those with faith sufficient to wield them, and both ask their wielders to become reapers, harvesters who cut according to divine will as they understand it, envoys of whatever powers they choose to serve. Dragon King's Cragblade. In the heart of the storm beyond time, at the seat where reality bends and flows in ways that defy normal understanding, there once ruled an Elden Lord, whose power predated the age of the Erd Tree itself. Dragon Lord Plasudasax was not merely a powerful dragon or an ancient beast. He was Elden Lord in an age before the current order, a king whose God once blessed him and whom he served faithfully. But that God fled, abandoning Plasudasax to wait eternally in his storm-wreathed throne, patient and deathless for a return that may never come. When a tarnished finally reaches crumbling Faru Missoula and discovers the hidden path to Plasudasax's arena, when they defeat this ancient lord in combat and claim his remembrance, they can exchange that memory for one of two rewards. One is Plasudasax's ruin, the devastating incantation that summons the Dragon Lord's heads to unleash golden breath. The other is the Dragon King's Cragblade, a weapon that contains a portion of the Dragon Lord's immense power. The description tells us, this is a piercing gravel stone sword containing primeval lightning. Gravelstone is significant throughout dragon-related lore in the lands between. The Gravelstone seal, used by practitioners of dragon cult incantations, is said to be a scale of the ancient dragon lord. The connection between Placidusax, Gravelstone, and primeval lightning forms a consistent thread through items associated with the age before the Erd Tree. Primeval lightning is specifically the red lightning of ancient dragons, distinct from the golden lightning that came later through the dragon cult established by Godwyn. This older electrical power is wilder, more destructive, less refined. It represents the raw elemental force that ancient dragons commanded before any religious framework developed to channel and control such energies. The description continues with a statement of particular interest. This weapon commands great power over the paltry, mortal dragons of today. This single line establishes hierarchy, making clear that Placidusax exists on a fundamentally different level than the dragons that populate the lands between in the current age. Even Agil, Smaragd, and other flying dragons are diminished compared to their ancient progenitor. Even Lanceax and Fortisax, the ancient dragons who joined the dragon cult, are lesser than Placidusax. This superiority is reflected mechanically in the weapon's damage bonus against dragons. When wielding the Dragon King's Cragblade, all damage dealt to dragon-type enemies is increased. This makes the weapon particularly effective for dragon hunting, turning Placidusax's own power against his inferior descendants. The weapon itself is classified as a heavy thrusting sword, a weapon category that combines the reach of spears with the speed of swords. The Cragblade has excellent range for its class, allowing wielders to maintain safe distance while still threatening enemies with quick, thrusting attacks. The weapon deals physical and lightning damage, with the lightning component scaling with dexterity, an unusual relationship that reflects how primeval lightning operated differently than later refined electrical powers. The weapon scales primarily with strength and dexterity, requiring balanced investment in both physical attributes. Notably, it does not require faith, despite dealing lightning damage and being derived from a being who was once Elden Lord. This absence of faith scaling reinforces that Placidusax's power is not theological but fundamental, not derived from belief, but from inherent ancient might. The unique weapon skill of the Dragon King's Cragblade is called Thundercloud Form, and it perfectly captures the combat style that made Placidusax such a memorable and challenging boss fight. When activated, the wielder temporarily transforms into a red thundercloud, their physical body becoming electrical energy that flies through the air toward a targeted direction. The cloud form can be held, extending the distance traveled, allowing for impressive mobility across the battlefield. As the thundercloud form dissipates, The wielder materializes with the Cragblade extended, plunging downward with lightning-infused thrusts that deal massive damage. This attack has excellent range due to the flight distance, creates a small area of effect lightning burst on impact. The transformation into red lightning, the flight, the descent with the blade extended, all of it recreates the feeling of Placidusax's own teleportation and dive attacks. In practical combat, Thundercloud form provides multiple benefits simultaneously. It offers excellent mobility, allowing the wielder to close distance rapidly or reposition to more advantageous locations. It provides invincibility frames during portions of the animation, making it useful for avoiding attacks that would otherwise be difficult to dodge. It deals high damage, especially against enemies weak to lightning, and it has inherent coolness factor that makes it satisfying to use regardless of pure mathematical effectiveness. The attack is particularly effective as an engagement tool, allowing the wielder to initiate combat from unexpected distances or angles. Enemies who think they are safe, out of range, suddenly find a red thundercloud streaking toward them, materializing into a tarnished wielding an ancient blade of gravel and lightning. The psychological impact in PvP cannot be understated. Few attacks are as visually intimidating as watching an opponent literally become lightning and fly at you. Against groups of enemies, Thundercloud form allows for hit and run tactics. Fly in, strike a target, and the momentum often carries the wielder through and past the group, creating separation that can be exploited for follow-up attacks or tactical retreat. The brief invincibility during the cloud transformation means the wielder can often avoid counterattacks that would normally punish such aggressive positioning. The heavy thrusting sword moveset itself deserves attention. These weapons have excellent reach and can poke from behind shields, making them useful for defense playstyles. The charged heavy attack has unique properties, including the ability to perform a special evasive backstep attack that creates distance while attacking. This moveset versatility, combined with Thundercloud form, makes the Cragblade adaptable to multiple playstyles and situations. To understand the weapon's significance, we must understand Placidusax himself. His title and position as Dragon Lord and Elden Lord before the Erd Tree place him among the most historically important entities in the lands between. He ruled during an age we know almost nothing about, served a god whose identity remains unknown, and withdrew to the storm beyond time when that god fled, rather than seeking new purpose or accepting diminishment. This eternal waiting is both tragic and admirable. Placidusax could have tried to maintain power through other means, could have sought new gods to serve, or could have attempted to preserve relevance in the changing world. Instead, he withdrew to his throne at the heart of a storm that exists outside normal time flow, becoming effectively immortal, but also irrelevant, patient but purposeless. He waits for a return that the text strongly implies will never occur, faithful to the point of futility. The remembrance description states that his god fled, not died or was defeated, but deliberately left. This suggests the god chose to abandon not just Plasudasax, but potentially the entire world, deciding for reasons unknown that this place and these people were no longer worth divine presence. Plasudasax's response was not anger or rebellion, but continued devotion, an eternal vigil for an absent master. When a Tarnished encounters him, Plasudasax does not attack out of malice or territorial aggression. He wakes from his timeless waiting because his domain has been invaded, because someone has reached the storm beyond time and demands his attention. The fight that follows showcases why he was once Dragon Lord, why he held the title of Elden Lord before the Erdtree existed. His red lightning sweeps across the battlefield. His teleportation makes him nearly impossible to track. His multiple heads attack from different angles simultaneously. Plasudasax is visibly diminished from his prime. He has only 2 heads remaining when the old lord's talisman shows him with 4. Portions of his other heads remain as stumps, testament to battles fought and damage sustained. His second pair of wings exists only as vestigial remains. Whatever conflicts occurred in his age, whatever led his god to flee, clearly took severe toll on the Dragon Lord himself. Yet, even diminished, even after waiting beyond time for uncountable years, Plasudasax remains formidable enough to challenge Tarnished, who have already conquered most of the lands between. His power is such that defeating him grants one of the largest remembrance rune rewards in the game. The portion of his might contained in the Dragon King's Cragblade represents only a fragment of what he once was. Yet, that fragment suffices to create a legendary weapon. The gravel stone construction connects the Cragblade to Plasudasax's very body. In a sense, the weapon is crafted from the Dragon Lord himself, from his scales, or perhaps from material shed during his endless waiting. This makes wielding the Cragblade more intimate than simply carrying a weapon he used. It means bearing a piece of Plasudasax, channeling his primeval lightning through material that was once part of his physical form. The bonus damage against dragons becomes more meaningful in this context. Plasudasax, through the weapon made from his own substance, can still exert dominance over the lesser dragons that came after him. The paltry, mortal dragons of the current age must submit to the power of their ancient progenitor, even when that power is wielded by a Tarnished who slew the Dragon Lord to claim it. The hierarchy persists beyond death, beyond time, enforced through the Cragblade's destructive potential. In builds focused on dexterity and lightning damage, the Dragon King's Cragblade finds its ideal home. The dexterity scaling for both physical and lightning damage creates unified stat investment, avoiding the split scaling issues that plague some weapons. Pairing it with lightning boosting equipment like the lightning scorpion charm, or with items that enhance charged attacks, turns the Cragblade into a precision instrument for delivering massive lightning damage. The weapon's effectiveness extends beyond pure dragon hunting, despite the anti-dragon bonus. The reliable lightning damage makes it useful against any enemies vulnerable to electric attacks, which includes many heavily armored foes and certain bosses. The reach and speed of heavy thrusting swords make it easy to find attack windows, and Thundercloud form provides utility that transcends simple damage calculations, offering mobility and style in equal measure. For players interested in the deeper lore of Elden Ring, wielding the Dragon King's Cragblade creates connection to the most ancient history accessible in the game. This weapon carries power from an age before the age of the Erdtree, before the Golden Order, before most of what defines the current lands between existed. It represents a time when dragons ruled, when different gods held sway, when the Elden Ring might have had a completely different form and function. The fact that Placidusax was Elden Lord raises fascinating questions. What did Elden Lord mean in his age? Was there an Elden Ring or some predecessor? What did his god grant him, and what responsibilities came with the title? The game provides no definitive answers, leaving players to speculate about the world and what it looked like when dragons held dominion, and Placidusax sat as lord over all. The Dragon King's Cragblade is all that remains accessible of that ancient age, a physical remnant that can be held and wielded, that can channel primeval lightning, just as it did when Placidusax ruled. Every activation of Thundercloud form is an echo of that lost time, a moment when the wielder becomes red lightning, just as ancient dragons once were lightning incarnate, when the boundary between flesh and elemental force dissolves and power flows as it did in ages long past. The weapon asks nothing except sufficient strength and dexterity to wield it properly. It does not demand faith or belief. It does not require arcane understanding or intelligence to comprehend esoteric principles. It simply exists, heavy with primeval power, ready to be used by anyone strong and quick enough to lift it and strike. This accessibility speaks to the fundamental nature of Placidusax's power, something inherent rather than granted, something that exists independent of theological frameworks or cosmic favor. And so, the Dragon King's Cragblade endures, carved from gravelstone, charged with primeval lightning, carrying a fragment of the Dragon Lord who waits still in the storm beyond time for a god who will never return. It remembers when dragons ruled, when red lightning was the mightiest force in existence, when Elden Lords served different masters, and the world operated under completely different rules. And it offers that remembrance to any tarnished brave enough to claim it, skilled enough to wield it, and willing to carry forward the legacy of the age before the Erdtree into whatever age comes next. Helphens Steeple. In the cold reaches of the mountain tops of the giants, where snow falls eternally and the very air seems to carry whispers of death, there patrol strange skeletal figures astride boats that glide across land as if it were water. These are the Tibia Mariners, undead sailors who have somehow crossed from the spirit world into the physical, or perhaps who exist simultaneously in both realms. They are guardians of death rites, shepherds of those who live in death, and keepers of knowledge about the transition between life and what comes after. One such Tibia Mariner, encountered in the frozen wasteland, guards a weapon of particular significance. Helphens Steeple is a greatsword that exists at the intersection of physical and spiritual, a blade forged from lamp wood and charged with ghost flame. The weapon's very name suggests its dual nature. Helphen, likely referring to some spirit realm or death-associated domain, and steeple, suggesting a pillar or marker, something that stands tall and visible as a landmark between worlds. The description tells us that Helphens Steeple is a lampwood greatsword that serves as a guiding light in the spirit world. This immediately positions the weapon as more than combat implement. It is a tool of navigation, a beacon that allows those who wield it to find their way through realms where normal landmarks do not exist, and where the usual rules of physical space do not apply. The spirit world, whatever its precise nature, apparently requires such guidance, and this weapon provides it. The description continues by explaining that the lampwood has been blessed with an incantation of death. This blessing transforms the wood from merely spiritual material into something actively aligned with death forces, something that channels the power of endings and transitions. The incarnation permanently infuses the wood, making the blade inseparable from the weapon's substance, rather than a temporary enhancement that might fade or be dispelled. The weapon deals physical and magic damage, an interesting combination that suggests the ghost flame it channels operates on principles closer to sorcery than faith. This distinguishes it from holy damage weapons aligned with the Golden Order, or fire damage weapons associated with flame incantations. The magic damage of Helphens Steeple represents something different, power drawn from the spirit world and death itself, rather than from divine or arcane sources. The weapon scales with strength, dexterity, and intelligence, requiring balanced investment across physical and mental attributes. The intelligence required speaks to the esoteric knowledge necessary to understand and channel ghost flame, to navigate the spirit world, to wield a weapon that exists partially in realms beyond normal perception. One must comprehend death not just as an ending, but as transition, as doorway to some places, to properly use this blade. The weapon skill of Helphens Steeple is called Ruinous Ghost Flame. When activated, the wielder slams the greatsword into the ground and summons ghost flame that spreads across the earth in a wide area. This flame does not burn in conventional sense, but rather consumes life force directly, dealing magic damage and frostbite buildup to everything it touches. The ghost flame lingers for a short duration, creating a zone of death energy that continues damaging enemies who remain within it. The combination of magic damage and frostbite buildup makes Ruinous Ghost Flame particularly effective. Frostbite reduces enemy defense and deals a burst of damage when it procs, making subsequent attacks more effective. The lingering area of effect denies territory, forcing enemies to either take continuous damage by staying in the Ghost Flame, or reposition to safer locations. This zone control capability makes the weapon excellent for managing groups of enemies or creating safe spaces during difficult encounters. The Ghost Flame itself appears as pale blue-white flame, cold rather than hot, light that somehow darkens rather than illuminates. It moves strangely, flickering in ways that suggest it exists partially in other dimensions, that what is visible is only one aspect of something that extends into realms beyond sight. When enemies are caught in the Ghost Flame, they react to not just to damage, but to something more fundamental, to having their life force directly consumed by energies from the spirit world. To obtain Helphens Steeple, the Tarnished must defeat the Tibia Mariner, who patrols the frozen lake and the mountaintops of the giants. This particular Mariner is somewhat more challenging than earlier versions encountered in Limgrave or Liurnia, wielding more powerful attacks and commanding more dangerous summons, but the pattern remains consistent. Destroy the boat, and the Mariner falls, dropping his weapon as reward. The Tibia Mariners themselves represent a mystery within the larger mysteries of death in the lands between. They are skeletal undead who pilot boats that somehow move across solid ground as if it were water. They appear at locations associated with death, with burial, with the transition between life and whatever comes after. They can summon skeletal warriors to fight for them, and they wield weapons that channel ghost flame and death energies. The connection to Lampwood and Spirit World navigation suggests the Tibia Mariners serve as psychopomps, guides who help souls transition from the physical world to whatever realm awaits after death. The boats they pilot are not physical vessels, but spiritual ones, traversing not geographic distances, but metaphysical boundaries. When they appear to glide across land, they are actually moving through the spirit world, which overlays the physical in ways that normal perception cannot fully grasp. Helphens Steeple, as a lampwood greatsword that serves as guiding light in the spirit world, would be an essential tool for such work. The ghost flame it channels marks safe paths, illuminates spiritual hazards, guides souls toward their proper destinations. When wielded in combat, that same guiding light becomes weapon, the energies that show the way to the dead, used to send living enemies toward death. The relationship between Helphens Steeple and those who live in death adds complexity. These undead beings exist in a state that should not be possible. Death without complete dying, animation without true life. They are errors in the natural order, things that fell through the cracks when death was removed from the Elden Ring, and the cycle of life and death was broken. The Tibia Mariners, as guardians and guides of proper death rites, have complicated relationships with those who live in death. On one hand, these undead need guidance just as much as properly dead souls do. On the other hand, their very existence represents a failure of the death system the Mariners exist to facilitate. Helphens Steeple can damage and destroy those who live in death, but it can also guide them, show them paths through the spirit world, even in their cursed, half-dead state. The frostbite buildup from ruinous ghost flame connects to cold's traditional association with death. Bodies grow cold when life leaves them. The absence of heat represents the absence of vital force. Ghost flame burns cold rather than hot, consuming life without generating physical heat, draining vitality through contact with energies from the realm of the dead. When frostbite procs, enemies are briefly frozen in place, their movement stilled as if death itself has touched them and rendered them motionless. In practical gameplay, Helphens Steeple functions as an effective greatsword with useful additional properties. The strength and dexterity requirement keep it accessible to quality builds, while the intelligence scaling rewards investment in mental attributes. The magic damage component makes it effective against enemies vulnerable to such attacks. The frostbite buildup provides status effect utility that can turn difficult fights manageable. The weapon's real strength lies in its crowd control capabilities. Ruinous Ghost Flame creates a large zone of death energy that damages and slows enemies. In situations where being surrounded means death, having the ability to create temporary safe zones by denying territory becomes invaluable. The skill can interrupt enemy attacks, scatter formations, and create breathing room for recovering stamina or healing. Against those who live in death specifically, Helphens Steeple performs admirably. These undead enemies often appear in groups, shambling toward targets, with numbers rather than speed as their advantage. The area of effect Ghost Flame hits multiple undead simultaneously, the magic damage and frostbite working together to eliminate them efficiently. The weapon becomes tool of proper death, bringing endings to those trapped in unnatural persistence. The lampwood construction raises questions about what lampwood actually is and where it comes from. Traditional lamps contain oil or some combustible substance that provides light and heat. Lampwood that serves as spiritual guidance would need to generate light of a different kind, illumination that exists in metaphysical rather than purely physical wavelengths. This wood has been grown or shaped specifically to serve as beacon in realms where normal landmarks don't exist. That such material can be blessed with incantations of death and then fashioned into weapons suggests that death in the lands between is not simply cessation of force that can be shaped and directed. Death has properties, characteristics, energies that can be channeled, just like fire or lightning or holy power. The incantation permanently imbues Lampwood, making Helphens Steeple not just a weapon held by someone who understands death, but a weapon that is death in a focused and weaponized form. When a Tarnished claims Helphens Steeple from the Tibia Mariner, they inherit more than combat implement. They receive a fragment of the knowledge that the Mariners possess, understanding of how to navigate between physical and spiritual, awareness of death as transition rather than ending. The weapon remembers its purpose as guide, as light in darkness, as marker showing the way for souls who have lost their path. Yet now, that purpose is bent toward violence. The guiding light becomes consuming flame. The navigation tool becomes weapon of destruction. Helphens Steeple demonstrates how easily spiritual implements can be repurposed for material combat, how easily tools meant for gentle guidance can become instruments of forceful ending. The ghost flame that should illuminate paths to peaceful rest instead burns away the living, reducing them to states where they will need such guidance themselves. There is irony in using a weapon of the Tibia Mariners against those who live in death. These undead exist because death was broken, because the natural transition the Mariners facilitate was interrupted and corrupted. Helphens Steeple, tool of proper death rites, being used to destroy undead who should never have existed, represents attempting to fix errors in the system through force, bringing violent ends to beings who missed their chance for proper, peaceful transition. The pale blue-white flames continue to flicker across the battlefields, cold fire that burns without heat, light that comes from the spirit world rather than combustion. Each activation of ruinous ghost flame creates temporary overlap between physical and spiritual realms, bringing energies that should remain separate into contact, using forces meant for guidance to inflict damage and impose endings. Helphens Steeple stands as a reminder that death has always been more complex than simple cessation, that the boundary between life and what comes after is something that can be navigated. Guides exist for those who need them, and the implements of those guides can become weapons when the system breaks down and force becomes necessary. The Lampwood remembers its purpose, even as it serves new masters, channeling ghost flame for violence, while still carrying within itself the knowledge of how to light the way for lost souls seeking their final rest. Ghizas Wheel. In the grand dining hall of Volcano Manor, where members of Rykard's recusant order gather to receive assassination contracts and plan their blasphemous campaigns, there waits a figure whose very presence speaks of torture and interrogation. Inquisitor Ghiza is not simply another invader or guard. He is described in his armor set as carrying out grim tasks, surveillance, and execution, his festering face hidden beneath tightly wound bandages soaked through with blood. And the weapon he wields is perhaps one of the most disturbing implements in all the lands between. The description of Ghizas Wheel tells us plainly what it is: a great iron wheel lined with flesh-flaying blades, a device of torture used by Inquisitor Ghiza. As the wheel spins, it causes severe pain and blood loss. This is not a weapon that was designed for honorable combat or quick kills. It is an instrument of torture, a tool meant to inflict maximum agony while keeping victims alive long enough to extract information, confessions, or simply to satisfy sadistic desires. The description continues with a detail that makes the weapon's nature even more horrific. The design was adopted for use as the iconic weapon wielded by Iron Virgins. These are the abductor virgins, those mechanical monstrosities that roam certain areas of the lands between, particularly around Volcano Manor and the depths beneath it. These machines kidnap Tarnished and others, trapping them within their Iron Maiden bodies and presumably subjecting them to torture using the same wheel design that Ghiza perfected. This connection suggests that Ghiza was not merely torturing individuals for Volcano Manor, but developing and refining techniques that would be mechanized and mass-produced. His wheel became template for the weapons that Iron Virgins used, meaning his tortures were so effective, so perfectly calibrated for inflicting pain and extracting blood, that they were deemed worthy of industrial-scale implementation. The weapon itself is a colossal armament, classified specifically as a colossal weapon rather than any more refined category. It is exactly what it appears to be: a massive circular saw blade lined with flesh-ripping teeth, attached to a handle that allows it to be swung and thrust like an oversized hammer. The visual design is immediately distinctive and unsettling, resembling nothing so much as an industrial metal cutting saw repurposed for use on human bodies. Ghiza's wheel requires significant strength and moderate dexterity to wield, the stat distribution reflecting its nature as a heavy, awkward implement that nonetheless requires some skill to use effectively. It deals purely physical damage, no magical or elemental components, just raw, mechanical trauma from spinning blades cutting through flesh and bone. More significantly, it causes blood loss buildup with every strike. The flesh-flaying blades, designed specifically to maximize bleeding and the agony that comes with it. The weapon's unique skill is called Spinning Wheel, and it takes the torture device's core function and turns it into a combat technique. When activated, the wielder strikes the wheel against the ground, causing it to spin at top speed. This spinning can be maintained by holding the activation button, and while the wheel spins, the wielder can walk forward, pushing the spinning blades into enemies like a mobile buzzsaw. The visual and audio effects of Spinning Wheel are deeply unsettling. The metallic whirring sound of the spinning blades, the sparks that fly when the wheel scrapes against the ground, and the way enemies are caught in the spinning teeth and shredded. All of it creates visceral discomfort. even as it proves devastatingly effective. This is not the clean combat of swords and sorcery, but industrial violence, mechanical brutality that reduces enemies to meat caught in machinery. The blood loss buildup from spinning wheel is substantial. Enemies caught in the spinning blades rapidly accumulate hemorrhage, often triggering blood loss multiple times during a single sustained activation. This makes the weapon extremely effective against bosses and tough enemies with large health pools, where percentage-based damage from blood loss can dramatically reduce the time needed to secure victory. To obtain Ghizas Wheel, a Tarnished must accept the invitation to join Volcano Manor, either through Raya's questline or by reaching the manor through other means. Once inside, ascending the stairs from the main hall and entering the dining room triggers Inquisitor Ghizas' invasion. He spawns at the far end of the room, near the windows, wielding his signature wheel and immediately becoming aggressive. The fight against Ghiza can be challenging for unprepared players. He swings the massive wheel with surprising speed, and when he activates spinning wheel, he becomes incredibly dangerous, walking forward with the spinning blades extended. Getting caught in the spin often means rapid blood loss that can kill even well-leveled characters if they cannot escape quickly. However, Ghiza has a weakness. He has low poise and can be stun-locked with proper weapon choices. He has no ranged attacks, making him vulnerable to spells and arrows, and his attack animations have long recovery periods that can be exploited for backstabs. Defeating Ghiza rewards his signature weapon, the blood-soaked bandages he wears as a mask, and the official's attire that marks his role within whatever organization he serves. The immediate availability of such a powerful blood loss weapon relatively early in a playthrough makes Ghizas Wheel popular among players building around the hemorrhage mechanic. The question of who Ghiza actually is and what authority he serves remains somewhat ambiguous. He is called an Inquisitor, a title associated with investigation, interrogation, and punishment of heretics and criminals. The official's attire he wears is described as worn by magisterial officials to carry out grim tasks. This suggests he serves some governmental or religious authority, not merely Volcano Manor itself. Some have theorized that Ghiza is actually an agent of Leyndell, sent to infiltrate or sabotage Volcano Manor's blasphemous operations. His presence in the dining hall, where recusants gather, could be surveillance gone wrong, his cover blown just as the Tarnished arrives. Others suggest he serves Volcano Manor directly, that Rykard employed Inquisitors to extract information from captured enemies and to ensure loyalty among his followers. The fact that his wheel design was adopted by the abductor virgins suggests he has been at this work for some time, long enough for his methods to be recognized as exemplary and worthy of mechanical reproduction. The Iron Virgins patrol around and beneath Volcano Manor, kidnapping people and presumably bringing them somewhere for purposes unknown. If those purposes include torture and interrogation using Ghiza's techniques, it paints a darker picture of what happens to those captured by Rykard's forces. The weapon itself has gained somewhat mimetic status in the player community, affectionately nicknamed the Pizza Cutter due to its resemblance to that kitchen implement. This irrelevant naming provides some tonal relief from the weapon's horrific actual purpose, allowing players to engage with it without dwelling too long on the implications of wielding a torture device. In practical gameplay terms, Ghizas Wheel excels in situations where sustained pressure and blood loss buildup are valuable. The spinning wheel skill can stun lock many enemies, holding them in place while the blades shred them and trigger repeated hemorrhage procs. Against bosses that can be bled, activating spinning wheel during their recovery animations can deal massive damage before they retaliate. The weapon synergizes well with equipment and talismans that enhance blood loss buildup or provide bonuses when hemorrhage triggers. The Lord of Blood's Exaltation talisman increases attack power when blood loss occurs nearby. The White Mask helmet provides similar benefits. Building around these synergies transforms Ghizas Wheel from merely effective to devastatingly powerful. The Colossal Weapon classification means Ghizas Wheel has relatively slow normal attacks compared to lighter weapon types. The swings have significant wind-up and recovery, creating vulnerability windows. However, the reach is excellent, and the impact is tremendous. Landing a fully charged heavy attack with the wheel spinning can stagger even large enemies, creating openings for follow-up attacks or riposts. There is something deeply disturbing about how effective torture implements are when repurposed as weapons of war. Ghizas Wheel was designed to cause maximum pain and bleeding while keeping victims alive and conscious. These same qualities make it devastatingly effective in combat, where causing pain and blood loss to enemies is the entire objective. The transition from torture chamber to battlefield requires no modification to the weapon itself, only change in context and target selection. This raises uncomfortable questions about the nature of violence and the thin line between judicial punishment and warfare. If a device designed for torture works perfectly as combat weapon, what does that say about combat? If the skills developed in interrogation chambers translate directly to battlefield effectiveness, where then is the meaningful distinction between the two? Between state-sanctioned violence and criminal brutality? Ghiza himself embodies these ambiguities. He wears official's attire, suggesting legitimate authority. He carries out grim tasks under some governmental or organizational mandate, yet his weapon is instrument of torture. His face is festering and hidden. His very presence inspires revulsion. Whether he is upholder of order or a monster in official clothing depends entirely on whose authority one recognizes and whose violence one considers legitimate. The abductor virgin's adoption of the wheel design further complicates matters. These machines were created, presumably by those with technical knowledge and resources. Someone looked at Ghiza's torture wheel and thought it should be mass-produced, mechanized, made into the defining weapon of kidnapping constructs. This represents institutional acceptance of torture methods, organizational decision to embrace techniques developed through inflicting pain on prisoners. When a Tarnished wields Ghizas Wheel, they carry forward all these implications. Every activation of spinning wheel, every enemy shredded in the spinning blades, every blood loss proc triggered recreates the torture that the wheel was originally designed to inflict. The difference is context and consent. Enemies are combatants rather than prisoners. Violence is mutually engaged rather than one-sided domination. Death comes quickly rather than being prolonged for interrogation purposes. Yet the weapon remembers. The flesh-flaying blades remember every scream they've extracted, every confession they've torn from broken victims, every drop of blood they've spilled in dark rooms where no one could hear and no one would help. Ghizas Wheel is not a noble weapon with a proud legacy. It is a torture device turned murder implement, tool of systematic cruelty repurposed for efficient killing. Ghizas Wheel stands as testament to human capacity for inflicting suffering, and how easily techniques developed for torture translate to warfare. It reminds us that the lands between is not just a place of gods and heroes, cosmic forces and destiny, but also mundane horrors, institutional cruelty, grim tasks carried out by officials whose faces fester beneath blood-soaked bandages. And it endures, waiting to be claimed, ready to spin once more. The pizza cutter that cuts flesh instead of cheese. The wheel that turns agony into efficiency. The torture device that proved itself too effective not to weaponize. If this journey through weapon lore has enriched your experience of Elden Ring, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. There are always more stories to tell from these shattered lands, more legends to explore, more connections to uncover. The lands between is deep with history, and every weapon is a thread that leads to understanding. Rest well, Tarnished. Let these tales of legendary armaments accompany you into peaceful sleep, and when you wake, perhaps you will return to the lands between with new eyes, seeing in every weapon not just stats and skills, but stories and philosophies, histories and implications, the accumulated weight of all who wielded them before and all that they represented. Safe travels. May your chosen weapons serve you well. May you understand their stories as you wield their power, and may whatever legacy you build in the lands between prove worthy of the legendary arms that helped you achieve it. The embers fade, the night deepens, and we rest now, surrounded by the echoes of weapons that have shaped ages and will shape ages still to come.